Hi, I am CJ Devgan, and welcome to another edition of Breaking Barriers, where my goal is to provide you with proven tools to help you transform your business. We are living in times where business, as usual, is not sustainable. Because new disruptors are arriving every day, therefore, you too must reinvent and break barriers that are holding you back. If you are struggling to grow your business, check out my website at cjdevgan.com and learn about my consulting and coaching services, and let's talk. Welcome. Our guest today is Ron Carucci. Ron is co-founder and managing partner at Navalent, working with CEOs and executives pursuing transformational change for their organization. Ron has a 30-year track record helping executives tackle challenges of strategy, organization, and leadership. His work has been featured in Fortune, CEO Magazine, Inc., Business Insider, MSNBC, Business Week, Smart Business, and Thought Leaders. Without further ado, let me welcome Ron. Hi, Ron.
Hi, CJ. How are you? Great to be with you today.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Breaking Barriers with Digital Transformation.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Very good. So I understand you are calling and dialing in from Seattle with snowstorm.
Yeah, talk about transformational disruption. Seattle almost never has snow, and so on days like today, when snow, this much of it especially, disrupts the city, it's always fascinating to watch how people adapt or are unable to adapt.
Very true. Very true. You know, to start with, share with our audience a couple of transformational initiatives that you have implemented. One that delivered the expected result and one that did not deliver the expected results, and the learnings that you got from both initiatives.
Yeah. Gosh, so most of our transformational projects are at the enterprise level, usually working with someone in the C-suite or the CEO, where there is some strategic mandate to make some sharp turn, or they're stuck in a ditch already. They need to get out of the ditch. Organizationally, they're not built to execute well. So some complicated systemic need for change where one or two quick silver bullets are not going to work. So I'm thinking about two different enterprise levers. One was a clean energy company that was a combination of multiple acquisitions coming together on a unified platform, and one was a large global food company. And interestingly enough, both took very similar approaches in terms of a very thorough and rigorous diagnostic on the front end, a very intentional, focused design effort to design and reconfigure the organization to optimize against the strategy, a very clear and difficult but important articulation of differentiators by the senior executive team, and a careful, thoughtful approach to implementation of the change. So what's interesting to me as I contrast these two is one, in the face of two very difficult industries, right? Clean energy, still trying to get traction, trying to figure out how to be profitable. Food, a very controversial industry, a very fragmenting and localizing industry. So you have, definitely headwinds in their faces. Mm-hmm. The difference was, of course, leadership. So in the clean energy business, you had a set of executives, you had a distributed set of responsibilities, and a recognition that the approach needed to be far more comprehensive than they had thought. Initially, their intent was to have us to unify these acquisitions into a cohesive whole, to do process maps, to do sort of handbooks, some very simplified way of trying to codify behavior or expectations. And we, of course, that's going to be woefully insufficient. And so did a whole lot more and did a much more holistic redesign of an enterprise that didn't exist. And we had people from all of the acquisitions be part of that. So you had the process itself was a unifying whole. and people were transparent and honest and had great debate. In the food example, you had very weak leadership. You had people who were less committed, and a CEO who had tried so many things before this to try and turn around this failing enterprise. They had made some disastrous acquisition decisions, and a design process that had become very politicized and very fear-based. And so when it came time to implement it, they just couldn't do it. So after months and months and months of work, it never even got off the ground. And eventually the enterprise, got taken over. The CEO was fired. A conglomerate came in and broke it up. It was a very sad ending. So, for me, the both took rigorous approaches. Both had great diagnostics. Both were thoughtful in who they appointed to help architect the change or the transformational journey. But very different outcomes when it comes to the variable of leadership and the variable of true commitment to change. Now, I've seen a lot of different variables determine whether or not success happens. I've seen leaders, go down the campaign trail to campaign for change, but do none of the real work. Or they pulled a single lever, like let's do new cultural values, or let's reorganize the org chart, or let's, make more efficient the processes by adding technologies. They pull one systemic lever and leave all the others in place, and of course that always falls short too. But what I find interesting about these, CJ, is that both organizations did a lot of it right. They went after all the domains of change you want to look at. For us, it's code for within, between, and among. Deep within the leaders and their own narratives and their own stories, between leaders, between departments, between any seam of an organization where you have to have greater cohesion, and systemically among the governance processes, the cultural issues, the strategic positioning. But I think the food company didn't really do a serious job within. They did the between and the among design work and the transformational creation work, but they were never seriously adopting it within. They were never committing to their own personal change at all. And I think that's what did them in.
So key takeaway for our audience here is commitment of leadership, having a clear vision and having commitment from not only the leadership but all the major stakeholders. So having identified all the stakeholders, get their buy-in, get their commitment, and then embark on a program of this magnitude.
Well, and I think, that's certainly a critical part of it. But again, what I would add or punctuate with CJ is that, change within, change between, and change among. You have to have all three for transformational results. And however you do it, however you monitor it, you've got to make sure there is work being done to generate change in all three of those. That's the display of commitment, right? So I think a lot of leaders in their heart of hearts feel genuinely committed to change. They genuinely recognize the need for change. They just don't know how to do it. And so someone tells them, here's the silver bullet pathway to transformation, and it happens to be a singular among initiative, or it's team building, it's a singular between initiative, or it's some workshop we want all leaders in through to sort of learn about their own behavior, right? And so they do a great job in a within or a between or an among approach to change, but foregoing the other two. And so it's not just enough to say I'm committed and to invest heavily in one domain, because even with the best of intentions, you'll still fail. You've got to do it across all three.
So what practical tips and techniques can you share to get these changes with, between, and among? So share with us some practical tips that listeners of this program can actually bring them into their change initiative.
So change within is a deeper exploration of the inner territory of leaders. They're all shaped by biases, by narratives, by beliefs about themselves and each other, about how they see the world, about their role, about their contribution to the problem, or their innocence in the problem. And you've got to go dig all that out. That happens sometimes with some multi-rater feedback tools. It happens with some individual work. It happens by teaching about what operative narratives are and getting them to be honest about what theirs is, and how their perspectives about one another and about the enterprise may be flawed. So it's deeper work. Change between can happen at any scene, right? So we've had organizations where at the intersection of R&D, marketing, and supply chain, you have the muscle of innovation. But if those functions are warring factions, if those functions have misaligned incentives and competing objectives and don't see each other as a partner, but see each other as rivals, you're not going to get much innovation. And so bringing those folks together to do what we call, fix the seam or stitch the seam, and design that intersection, right? So it's not just a matter of doing team building and say, hey, let's all get along better. There has to be design work to say, how does supply chain plus marketing plus R&D equal innovation? And what are the contributions each has to make so that you have innovative outcomes, strategically, operationally, culturally? So you have to bring those folks together to get intentional about what those themes are. Systemically among, governance is always a great example. How have you intentionally distributed the decision rights, the authority, and the resources across the enterprise so that the right leaders are sitting around the right table with the right authority and money to make the right decisions and keep the organization synchronized? So often you have way too much decision compression in an organization and all pathways lead to the top. And so you have the senior executives involved in way too much of governing in the enterprise than they should be, no matter how big or small the company is. Or you have, whoever the fair-haired favorite is of the week getting disproportionate levels of money and resources to make decisions. If you have a CMO, a head of marketing that's a fair-haired boy or girl, and it's a very brand-driven company, they're tipping the ship. But your operational side of the business and your talent side of the business is getting starved. So regardless of how it's done, you have to make sure governance, as an example, is systemically designed to match your strategy, to match what you say you want to be in the marketplace. And so often they're not. So often you have governance is like bad wallpaper in a house. You walk in and there's like 8 layers of wallpaper from the last 30 years, and nothing more will stick. We all hear the most famous symptom of all. We're in way too many meetings. We spend all of our days in useless, unproductive meetings like right? Well, that's not a symptom of the fact that you suck at meetings. That's a symptom of the fact that you have a seriously flawed governance design that needs to be blown up and rebuilt. But if you're not willing to do that work and shut down standing meetings that shouldn't be existing, you're going to be consuming, influence capital needlessly. So within, between, among. And my guess is that if your listeners were to step back and reflect on any particular transformational journey they were part of that didn't go well or as hoped, and they were to examine it through the lens, they could probably figure out very quickly which of those 3 didn't get attended to as it should have.
Correct. So this is more an organizational culture and changing corporate culture where you can consciously show people how their behaviors are impeding these change initiatives. So what kind of tools and techniques have you used to do that, influence that corporate culture?
Well, so, the interesting thing about culture, CJ, is that people point to a lot of things when they want to influence culture. It's become it's like communication, and it's become a catch-all word. But when you dig up underneath and you ask people, what's the culture? Most leaders don't really know what it is. And so they pull the values lever. We need new values. We just had a phone call from a startup biotech company who had done a major reverse acquisition of a larger company, and they had asked, let's do new values. But when you dug up underneath why, it was because they had an executive at the top of the organization who had never led anybody else, who was a screamer and a madman, and they were trying to change his behavior. So, people pull the culture lever for all kinds of the wrong reasons. The debate in behavioral science for 3 decades has been, is culture a means or an end? Is it an outcome or a lever? It's both, right? Yes, you can shape culture. Yes, you can codify behavior. You can You can create a sense for these are the behaviors required to execute this strategy. But too often people codify behavior to be corrected, right? So that food company I mentioned earlier, they spent millions and millions of dollars codifying behavior to correct the culture that was there. And mysteriously, all of the values, all of the operating principles they were aspiring toward were things intended to fix bad behavior from the past. Well, of course, everybody saw right through that. And the last thing that's going to happen when you create values as a weapon, when people know that they're designed to fix them, you can bet that the last thing they're going to do is to sign up to change their behavior. So if you're going to play the codified behavior lever, you've got to be clearly do it in the service of a strategy, in the service of this is who our identity is in the marketplace, and therefore this is what kind of behavior we need to execute that. The other thing about culture is that the levers of the things that shape behavior, the things that just shape people's discretionary choices on a day-to-day basis, how you set direction, how you allocate resources, how you measure contribution, how you select and advance leaders, how you budget. So, strategy, finance, HR, those are the functions that own many of the levers that shape the cues people take, that shape their discretionary choices for how they behave in organizations, for how they speak up in meetings or don't, for how they go the extra mile or don't. And so all those levers have to be aligned to make sure that they're encouraging behavior that's consistent with what you need, and to be examined and scrutinized very painfully. We had one company call us up and say, "Hey, our decision-making processes are too slow. We need people to be more entrepreneurial because all the decisions are coming to the top and people aren't behaving in an empowered way. So could you come and do a workshop for us, for our top 400 leaders that run them all through this so we could teach them how to be more entrepreneurial so they can get faster at decision-making?" And we said, well, that's interesting. So that what? So that what would happen? Well, so that we can execute more quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I said, okay. So how do you know that it's a skill gap? How do you know that it's their lack of skill that is disabling them from the other? Well, it's probably other things too, but we could start there. So we did a little bit of sniffing around and found out that the approval process to get very low levels of budget approved required 10 signatures and all went to the top. There was no information access, so anybody who wanted to make decisions couldn't get access to the data they needed to make them. And there was no expectation set anywhere in any employee's job description or anywhere in how people were trained or taught that they actually make decisions. So the entire system was conspiring to make sure decisions did not get made quickly, and yet they thought if we shifted everybody into a workshop, that'll change it. So they gave a primary example of the need to do something very different other than what people are instinctively wanting to do. Everybody wants a silver bullet for change. And so we think, let's reach for the education or training lever that, sheep dip everybody through a workshop for 4 hours and suddenly we'll have new behavior. Whereas the origins of unwanted behavior, the origins of contradictory behavior to what you need lie at far deeper levels than just people's skill.
I completely agree. I think, and this will go back to our original question, which I was going to get to, is what triggered this transformation? What triggered this organization to embark on this transformational journey? What was the sense of urgency? Was there a real sense of urgency, or is it something, okay, we want to do this?
I'm sure it was, in the case of the decision-making workshop, I'm sure it was a bunch of executives sitting around saying, why am I getting all these approvals? Or why do I have to be involved in this stuff? Or why are we at this level talking about this level of tactical issue? Some expression of frustration that some HR person went off and took as a mandate to do something. And probably not much more. In the case of the food company, they were losing market share. They had become irrelevant. And in the case of the energy company I spoke about earlier, it was a major competitive opportunity, but they had done these acquisitions. They'd been put together by outside capital, and they needed to behave as one company, but they had never done that before. So in order to realize the aspirations they had set after, they had to reconfigure themselves. So in all three of those cases, various degrees of strategic urgency or strategic mandate But in two of the cases, flawed understanding of what it would take to actually get change to happen.
And I completely agree. And the reason I was diving into that direction is, as we all have experienced, the hardest thing in any of these programs that we have implemented is to get people out of their comfort zone. We all are used to doing things. When I was going to grad school and our organization change professor, she said, just take off your watch off your left hand, put it on your right hand for the duration of the class and see how uncomfortable you are. And it was so true. And I had never realized how much used to we get to these simple things. And that is one of the easiest things. Now, when we go into these organizations and we ask people to change the way they are thinking, the way they are making decisions, the way they are doing work, is going to create some resistance. And then, even though it is small group of people, but if they have a bigger voice, that resistance becomes very big obstacle that needs to be cleared. And the only way you can do that is to help them understand what is in it for them. The fine organization is trying to do a merger of another company. So I'm sitting at the front line. Why do I care? And unless we can give those answers clearly and a constant communication, clear communication, to me is very important. So everything you're saying. Now we have to do a quick time check. We're at the bottom of the hour. I know you had some hard stop at this time. Are you okay to continue, or we should?
I have more time. So I have my 9:30 is stuck on the snow, so I have a few moments to continue. Sure.
Okay, very good. Because I want to give you some time to talk about your practice and how you can help our listeners and audiences. But it's a great conversation. I want to continue change, because organizational change and transformational sometimes people take them synonymously, but to me, it is one of the very important factors and influencer in the success of a large transformational program. So I don't want to go to other influencer, because you are an industry expert in organizational change. So I want to leverage your brain a little more. So help us a little more and how to overcome these things. What tips would you give us or give our audiences who are business owners of mid-sized companies of how they can change behaviors, or even how to think about that? Do I need change of behaviors, or do I need to change something else before I ask for behavioral change within my team?
Well, so I think it starts with every executive, especially in the mid-cap world, where you have the classic, I'm a $30 million company trapped in the body of a $2 million organization, or I'm a $100 million company trapped in the body of a $50 million organization. They grew, but they didn't scale, right? And so it's like the teenage boy in his dad's suit. They're just sort of, haven't quite grown up yet. I think every executive needs to recognize that they have to step back and learn to diagnose, right? So at some point, indicators of struggling performance or lacking ability to execute some indicator that's telling you this is not what I want. Before you reach for any lever, before you reach for any notion of change, ask yourself, have you done it? Nobody would walk into a cardiologist's office with pains in their chest and say, right here, it's a sharp pain right here to the left of my sternum, and have a cardiologist say, oh yeah, your left ventricle is clogged, it needs a stent. Let's go, I'll put one in. And you might, well, don't you want to look? No, I've seen it a million times. I know what to do. You would run out of the office. Well, why as an executive, if you thought, gosh, we're losing market share, or gosh, we've had two customers defect in the last 6 weeks, oh, it's a fluke. They were dissatisfied anyway. No, we'll get more. Why, if you saw symptoms of, that pain in your chest could have been indigestion, right? It could have been indicated that you're about to have a massive heart attack. Why, for goodness sake, would you not want to know and do a thorough job? You would expect a cardiologist to take you into an MRI and get a deep diagnosis before doing anything, and you want to happen right away. If you're seeing indicators that the organization is not synchronized the way you want, one of the classic calls we get from CEOs is, "I'm pulling all these levers and nothing's happening," right? Which is telling me that you're sitting at a control board as a CEO that's not connected to anything. So you ought to want to understand before you intervene in any way. Why is what's happening, and why isn't what you want to be happening, and make no assumptions that you know the answer. You may have some hints, you may have some clues, but if you just start recklessly and reflexively reaching for duct tape to sort of make change happen quickly, you're probably going to make it worse. And then if you have the more failed change you pile onto your organization, the more cynical they become. And then when you really need to implement, when things become more stressed and you really have to change, they don't trust you, right? You promised them change before, you haven't delivered. And so now you're depositing needed change into a very cynical environment. We call it "this too shall pass" club. People just sit there and they think this too shall pass. And they start to believe that, yeah, I've seen it before. Just give it a minute. We'll go on to the next silver bullet next week. So as a leader, you've got to understand that change is part of your executive job. It's no different than if a CEO who couldn't read his P&L, a CEO who didn't have a strategy, which by the way is very common. CEOs often confuse the mission statement or the annual operating plan or the product quota. They have so many counterfeits for understanding strategy. But when I ask them, tell me why people would pick you over the person up the street doing this. Why would customers choose you over the person, your most competitor? They can't tell me. They can't tell me what differentiates them competitively, where they've invested, and they can't tell me what customers they won't serve. And so, from the very beginning, CEOs and many senior executives don't understand the fundamentals of business. Meaning, you got to stay in a swim lane, you got to pick a swim lane, you got to invest in that swim lane, and you got to, figure out how to dominate it in a way that attracts customers to you and away from other choices. But so often they have counterfeit versions of that, and the market rewards them, right? So you have revenues, you have growth, you see some uptake in the market, you hit a niche, and you just hit the gas pedal, assuming that's all feedback that you're doing the right thing until you hit a cliff.
Excellent. So you mentioned about looking at the indicators. Do you have any sample indicators, or you're talking about basic business health indicators are the same indicators you need to continuously look for change as well?
Well, I think disciplined growth, right? So, first of all, do you have a strategy? Do you have a strategy that's really a statement of differentiators and focused capability building and a growth plan? Is it rounded in reality? Do you have data that says your market, your targets, your industry can tolerate what you're asking of it? And is that strategy understood by every single employee in your company? I don't care whether that's 100, 1,000, or 30,000. Does everybody in your company understand how what they're doing contributes to those outcomes? Because if the answer is no, you're just, all you're doing is insert every place you're not sure, just assume that's risk. And secondly, do you have the right metrics? Do you have metrics that would tell you whether or not you're making progress on your aspirations and where the risks are? Do you have a set of leaders sitting around a table sharing responsibility for those metrics and sharing responsibility for the organization? A set of leaders that don't come as the ambassador of their function. So I don't want to know that you have an executive UN around you, but I want you, the ambassador from marketing, the ambassador from sales, the ambassador from operations. I want to know that you have a set of executives who own the enterprise sitting around you. Again, I don't care if you're 100 employees or 1,000 employees or 10,000 employees. So if you haven't got those things, just the basics in place, then right away I can uncover all kinds of risk and likely bad assumptions about who you are to the marketplace and how well you'll grow.
Excellent points. Excellent points. So breaking barriers, generating new opportunities is what the whole subject of our show is all about. And having a clear strategy, having clear growth plans, understanding what makes you different than your competitors, what are your sustainable competitive differentiators, are key for your success. When you're picking your transformation programs, one of the most important things is, how is this program, how is this initiative going to help me achieve my vision? So with that, I would like to ask you, Ron, if there's anything, if any of our listeners wants to connect with you, what kind of services do you provide? If you want to give something to our listeners.
So I'd love to stay in touch. I hope that folks will want to keep chatting. You can find me at Navalent, NAVALENT.com. We've got some great articles, tools, videos on all aspects of change. We have a free quarterly magazine that you can get on leadership, organizational stuff, a lot about change. And we have a free ebook on leading transformation. So if this topic is near and dear to your heart, or you find yourself facing the need to do so, Navalent, NAVALENT.com/transformation. You go there, you can download our free ebook on how we think about within, between, and among. You also can find me on Twitter at Ron Carucci and also on LinkedIn. So I hope you'll stay in touch to keep the conversation going.
Thank you, Ron, for your valuable time and sharing your experiences with our audience.
It's my pleasure, CJ. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
That is it for today. Thank you for listening. I would love to hear from you and help out in any way I can. You can reach me at cjdevgan.com. If you like our show, please subscribe, leave a rating and a review for us. Let's go out and break barriers and generate new possibilities. Until next time, adios, ciao, and goodbye.